Hello and welcome to Console Shock, episode 49. Retro and modern gaming chat with me, Trev, and Stu, as always.
Hi there, Trev, how are you?
Yeah, alright, after you've finally managed to connect.
Oh man, major problems here.
Yeah, so you're Etherneted in now, you're like some kind
I'm Etherneted, yeah, I can quickly sort of... I'm actually, well, I'll tell you what, I'm not really Etherneted in. I've got those little plugs you put into the sockets in the wall.
The Ethernet?
Yeah, they're really good. They're really good.
I think I know what you mean, actually, and it routes it through. That's great. That's like outrageous technology.
My girlfriend will actually kill me if there's Ethernet cables going throughout the flat. She'll be... I'll have problems.
It's still the most reliable way, isn't it? I do love
exactly
me an Ethernet. And even though it's not... Well, it is faster, but for home use, I think Wi-Fi, and if you've got, like, you know, fibre optic, which I'm lucky enough to have here, it's pretty friggin' fast these days, a wireless connection. But I've got loads of retro, like, I've got loads of old Apple PowerBooks, and they don't use... they can't connect to my Wi-Fi because they don't have WPA2 ability.
Oh.
And there's no way to make it have that. So I have to plug them into Ethernet. So I've always got a bunch of ludicrously long Ethernet cables around, which is always useful. That's the connection that will never die.
Exactly.
Gas cable. Okay, so we've had a few sort of chats recently, haven't we, Stu, about the Amiga?
Yeah, it's our favourite subject.
It's our favourite subject. So yeah, as I sort of mentioned before we went live, we're probably going to alienate again most Americans and anybody under the age of sort of 30.
Well, the Amiga was actually an American machine.
What is it with that? A lot of the time they make all these machines themselves and they don't bloody buy them. They're like, oh, what the Japanese got? Let's buy all that instead.
Yeah.
Oh, you got really good stuff. Buy it. Well, the Mac, I guess, that kind of survived out of all those mid 80s computing platforms.
Only just hanging on.
How do you feel about that? Would you rather it was imagine if the Amiga survived? That's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It has, hasn't it? Yeah. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest. So, you'll probably be familiar by her online sort of YouTube channel, MsMadLemon. Thank you very much for coming on, Maddi.
Thank you.
Well, how do you feel about the Mac versus the Amiga? Which would you rather that the Amiga prevailed in the end, or do you like Macs?
Yeah, Amiga. I mean, at least in America, I'd rather the Amiga have a bit more of a chance, so people get to experience the Amiga a bit more than they did. You know?
I always sort of think of the Amiga as kind of, although we kind of have a mixture of the Amiga, like overlapped with the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum for a bit, so they're kind of one era almost that went off into the 90s, but. I always think of like Americans talk about the NES all the time. Basically, the 80s is basically Atari for a bit and NES, and that's it.
I've noticed that there's a lot of them NES happening in
the
US.
Well, I mean, I've mentioned before that I'm an oddball because my first console was a NES, and everybody else had Amigas and Master Systems. I got an Amiga later, but I think the Amiga is kind of our NES, which is why there's a ton of UK people that love talking about it. And you're one of our favourites, Maddi, so we actually love your content that you make on the Amiga. But what I would like to ask you, you know, as sort of a kick-off, so what sort of inspired you to make a YouTube channel? Was there other people that you watched and you thought, I want to get in on this? Was there anything particular that started you off on YouTube?
Actually, the thing is, I hadn't actually planned to do a YouTube channel at first. It was just started off as a channel of, because my niece and I started playing Minecraft, and so did my cousin. So I just wanted to make it be like a local channel for my niece and my cousin to just watch me, or just anything.
Oh, cool!
So it just started off as we did a lot of my earliest videos. The first ones are Minecraft ones. But then what happened is I started doing a computer build because I wanted a faster computer, and I decided to just, for some reason, just film the entire build, and I just started from there. And then I thought, I mean, I've always been into the Amiga. I've wanted to get back into it and so forth. So I thought, okay, in 2016, I eventually, doing some electronics projects at the beginning, I ended up just getting an Amiga and then started from there. Then I just came across the C64 and I just basically just like shared everything.
Did you have an Amiga back in the 90s?
I did, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Amiga 500, and later on I got a 1200, actually 600 and two 500s, two 1200. Yeah, I had a few.
Oh my God.
And then Amiga 1200 tower as well.
Oh wow.
Amigas like it's the apocalypse.
Yeah, because I built it from scratch. I got the iTech Easy Tower, and yeah, it was with zip drives, Crustos 7, everything. So it was just.
I think out of all of those sort of 16-bit computers, or just that sort of late 80s, early 90s sort of computer platforms, I think it is the easiest one to dive back into. I know you can get you can build your own 486 DOS PC, and that will sort of get you that all the way through to the late night, well, sort of 96, 97, the end of DOS gaming. But the Amiga is still it's just one computer. You just plug it in. You can still just pop the discs in. It's fairly easy to get compact flash card drives, whereas a PC it's not so easy. So you're covering most of what the PC library had in those days. And in fact, certainly when you get up to probably before Doom came out, it's kind of the cut-off point, isn't it? That we all say is where it really started to tank for the Amiga. You're probably getting the best versions of most computer games. Computer-based.
A lot of the Amiga games were ported onto DOS anyway, so
yeah,
Amiga you're playing DOS ports of Amiga games. A lot of games, so
exactly, yeah. So things like obviously Secret of Monkey Island. You obviously got the best music. You've got a lot of the other computers didn't really have proper the Paula chip. There was nothing like it really until Sound Blaster. And even that didn't really sound as good. It had more channels. But I don't think it really sounded as good until they really cranked that up in the sort of 95, 96. So in every way, you're sort of getting the best versions of things. And even beyond that, you can get Doom running now on an Amiga, and you can get SimCity 2000 if you want to hit that sort of 96, 97 time, and even Quake. So it is one of the most user-friendly computers just to dive back into that era, I think. And I've been tempted to build, me and Stu have talked about it, a PC, a DOS gaming PC, or to buy one. But to be honest, I've got when you got an Amiga up and running, you're kind of covered for all that stuff, aren't you? Without needing to do it. I mean, so when you had an Amiga, Maddi, in the 90s, was there a point when you just completely forgot about it? You got PlayStation like everybody else, and you didn't really think about it again until maybe you got nostalgic a few years later. Did that happen for you?
Actually, I stuck with the Amiga until
good
to 2004.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and it was actually a pressure from certain few people I won't mention to kind of why are you messing around with this old computer, blah blah blah. And at first they were like, why didn't you get a PC? Forget the Amiga. So I got a PC, but I kept the Amiga. That's why I got the iTech Easy Tower. Wanted both, both worlds. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll get both. But then again, the pressure started. It was just I don't know, maybe they saw I was having too much fun with it. But I gave it up in 2004, which I regret. Actually, when was it? It's 2007. I don't know why I sold my tower.
So it was a tower. I mean, what was it upgraded? Did you just completely kit it out?
I completely went nuts on it. I just got the tower, the Amiga 1200. Blizzard PPC 6840 with B Vision graphics card.
Oh my good God!
2 zip drives.
Is that even legal?
Yeah, why did I sell it? 2 floppy drives, CD-ROM drives also, because it's huge. It's got it's almost huge, a lot of bays there. So I not only that, I had another 1200 just like that, and then a 600 somewhere as well. So I was a bit crazy on Amiga. It was basically my high school days were doing homework on it and printing it on dot matrix printers and things
like that. Oh, they were awesome, yeah.
Yeah.
I used to love when you got a copy of Amiga format, and there'd be that shop in Sidcup or in Tottenham Court Road called Silica. They used to have these awesome adverts in Amiga format where they have the box of all the different Amigas with a big price badge on it, and then another separate one. You guys remember those guys? And they had a page that's dedicated to printers, but the printer was 400 quid for a good one, wasn't it, in those days? It was absolutely crazy. I mean, it's funny you should mention, Maddi, that you had everything in a tower. I kind of feel these days it's not as important, is it, to have an Amiga in a tower, because you can, I mean, something like a Vampire, I mean, supposedly they might be making an Amiga 1200 compatible version at some stage.
It's already been made in the prototype stage, by the way. It's just they are thinking of doing it. Actually.
Oh, cool! So there will be one.
There will be.
That's amazing.
Ah.
But yeah, it was kind of a necessity to put an Amiga 12. If you want to do any kind of serious upgrades to an Amiga 1200, you need to put it in a tower because RAM sticks were big and you need to fit loads of them in.
You need the extra power supply as well.
Yeah, like add-on accelerators. Some of them were too big for the trapdoor. If they were really high-powered stuff, CD drives. But now we've kind of gone backwards to the. I mean, I've always preferred the wedge sort of look to the classic Amiga.
Yeah.
And now because you can just accelerators are smaller now because the RAM chips are a lot smaller. And I think they just nick the actual Motorola processors out of old Macs. There's probably a lot more of those than there were like Amigas, and things like you don't need a CD-ROM drive really. You've got the CF card as your hard drive. You can use a PCMCIA adapter to transfer files, or you can get USB. I mean, I guess you've got an Amiga now, haven't you? I mean, have you bothered to tower that up now, or are you just going to leave it in the wedge sort of case?
Actually, I'm going to leave it in the wedge case because with all that stuff that I had. Even with a CD-ROM drive, I've got the external one. It's not an external one. It's the internal one with an external plug. So
oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean the power supply, the PS2 which I built, the Meanwhile one, it powers everything just fine. So there's actually, you're right. There's no need to tower it, and I do prefer the wedge.
It just looks like an Amiga, doesn't it?
It gives that Amiga feeling. Yes.
Yeah. And it's and when you think how much more powerful what you probably have is now in that wedge case than the A4000 tower or the big A4000 pizza box, you're like it kind of amazes you that now I could just have all this on this awesome little computer. That's the thing that kind of blows me away. So what would you say is the favorite thing that you've done with your Amiga? What thing do you think you do the most on it these days?
I actually do a lot of music making, so it's what I used to do back then, and it's what I do now on Soundtracker as well. What the other Vampire Amiga that's given me is Milky Tracker, which is I still haven't explored yet, but I want to explore more. I started making music in 1996, and then up to about 2003, I think. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And then, I remember, what was it? Do you remember Jesus on Ease? Do you remember that demo?
I remember that. Yeah, my brother had that.
that was always my favourite one. Sort of back in the day of it was just amazing. Sort of the sounds and the music that came out of the Amiga was just absolutely phenomenal. And I still watch that today. Actually, I watch it on YouTube rather than on an Amiga, but it's pretty good stuff.
It is. There's some impressive demos out there actually, because the first one I came across was the Avenger demo, and then the Rebels Mega demo. The earlier ones. Actually, it was one of the first things that I saw on the Amiga, and I was just blown away. I was just like, wow, because I was used to Spectrum back then. We had 48K, and that's all I saw. But I also saw Commodore 64 at a friend's house, so I've seen that, but. With the Amiga, it blew me away.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember like getting those copied discs off mates in like the schoolyard, that classic thing. I literally did do that, and you put it into your Amiga and you get this bizarre now I know it's a Cracktro. I didn't really understand what those were because I was too young to go to like these cracking parties and these scene parties. I mean, a lot of the people that did this stuff were about 10 years older than me. So there was no chance of me ever going to any of these things. So I was always really confused by them. So what is this wavy text and this phone number and all this stuff?
Yeah, actually, I have to admit, I thought the same thing because I was young too.
Yeah.
And, it was, I just used to see it as, okay, this is the part you click the mouse to.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I remember the first time I saw that, I didn't know to click the mouse. I was like pressing the keyboard. I was like hitting the joypad. I was like, what's wrong? I can't get past it. I think I leant
through the part where they click every function key.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, run my fingers across it. Yeah, to see which one hits. And I think I sort of leant on the mouse, and when it didn't, I was like, oh.
But they were always pretty good. Sometimes I used to leave them running.
Yeah, some of them be like some sort of some FPS thing, or like.
Well, yeah, they'll be just like, oh, actually, I like watching this, and this 30-second loop of a tune is, I feel like, I'm 13 years old, but I feel like I'm in a rave or something. I listen to adult music.
Yeah, I mean, some of the tunes are really good, really memorable, actually.
Every time I turn on my Amiga, I feel like I'm in a rave. Just a workbench, no sound, just workbench. That gets me going. Am I right, guys? Yeah,
exactly.
It has a unique feeling to it, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, I mean, I've got other classic computers. I mean, I'm quite into old Macs. So I've got a bunch of like mid-90s sort of. I've got a mid-90s Tower, a 6400, which I've got, and I like messing around with that. I like I'll put a clean install of Mac OS, classic Mac OS, and that's quite good to get games going on, because the Mac versions of games are actually quite unique, the mid-90s ones. It's still not the same though, because it takes a lot more work. It's something I have to really dig out and make a big point of making space for, just to mess around on it for a few hours. And it's not the same. Also, the games library is absolutely tiny compared to the Amiga, which is, I don't even know how many like commercial games there was. It's got to be a few thousand, right?
Or easily, yeah.
Easily. I mean, well, I guess they're still coming out as well. Like,
I've just got Power Glove. I just ordered this, and it's a new Amiga game. I'm excited to get it.
Yeah, I saw one today. Like, there's a Star Wars shoot 'em up that's coming out. I saw on Indie Retro News. It looks awesome. There's a bit when it goes into it works on a 500 and a 1200, like completely unexpanded. If you play on a 1200, there's a bit where you actually go in the Death Star trench, and it's like it's almost like playing back a video of like the Death Star trench, like scrolling by. It looks awesome, and I was like, it's almost like we're in a golden age or a second golden age of the Amiga a little bit.
It's true. I mean, it's like the developers these days, they know what they're doing, or they know this computer from way back, so they're more. It's almost like they're being more like what the demo sceners were back then, where they push the Amiga to its limits to get the best. So you get really good games. I mean, for example, on Commodore 64, you get games like Sam's Journey.
Yeah.
Forgetting that I kept forgetting that I'm on an 8-bit computer. I just felt like
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so you see this sort of thing happening on the Amiga as well. It's exciting times. It's an interesting time, actually.
Yeah, these are people that won't, unlike the commercial companies in the 90s, they won't have a cut-off point when they've got to finish a project, so they can keep diving deeper and deeper into it. And I was playing like Mortal Kombat 2 on my Amiga the other night, and I was like, it's actually not bad. And I was thinking, God, if someone could do like a dedicated AGA version of this, it would be like the best version out there. Because it was a really good, well, not actually, it was actually completely shit. Wow, that was me flipping quite dramatically there. But Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, there was that AGA version that came out, and in still screenshots, it looks awesome. Like, it looks like the arcade, but then it moves, and it's the frame rate is so bad, and it's completely unresponsive. I'm just like, God, probably because it was some contractor made it, and they wanted to quickly knock out an Amiga version because they got the license. I mean, now
just to have it in the Amiga just for the sake of that.
Yeah.
I remember, the first time, actually, I didn't play fighting games back then that much, but my niece is actually into fighting games like Mortal Kombat and so forth. So
cool.
I want to see Mortal Kombat on the Amiga, and I had no idea, so I put the disc in. I made the disc ADF to put it in. Oh my goodness, the waiting time.
Oh yeah, it's horrendous. It didn't bother me back in the day. I remember I got Mortal Kombat 1 on the Amiga, which I was like crapping myself before the time I got it home. And when I put it in, I just got a cup of tea, that's how long it took. It was like literally had to get a cup of tea.
Actually, it was like because I wasn't so used to games taking that long that I actually thought it was broken at first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when that one screen just looks like it's hanging way too long, and it's not gameplay. It's just like a code, like a logo of the developer. So you can't tell, can you, how long it takes?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's actually not bad. The first one's not bad. I mean, it's actually, those games are better now with WHD load, because you don't have any, especially like Mortal Kombat 2, where it had to load before a fatality.
Do they run quicker now on WHD load?
Yeah, because obviously they load a lot faster. There's no disk swapping.
Yeah.
There's no stuttering now when someone launches a fireball or does a special move. When
right, okay.
Load that stuff in. So yeah, it plays really good. I mean, I would argue that the Amiga version of Mortal Kombat 2 is better than the Mega Drive version because it's got way more sound samples. The Mega Drive version doesn't say the fighters' names when you win. The Amiga version actually does. So yeah, I would argue it might even be a bit better. The only thing is you're let down by the controls because it does support. Yeah, it does support 2 buttons. Annoyingly, that doesn't work for me because I've got an adapter that lets me use a NES controller on the Amiga, and I actually use I'm going off on a tangent here, but I use I've got an 8-bit DOE retro receiver, and I got the boards that 8-bit DOE have made, the wireless boards that you can put in a NES controller shell. I've got that, so I use an original NES controller, which is really cool, with a wireless board inside it. So that controller is now wireless that talks to my 8-bit DOE receiver, which is connected to my Amiga. So I've got a wireless joypad for my Amiga, but it doesn't, for some reason, it doesn't recognize 2 buttons. Apparently, it's a thing. There's an issue. If I plug a Mega Drive controller in it, it's fine. But yeah, a little tip for anybody that wants a wireless joypad on an Amiga, just get they're on eBay. I think someone in Ireland hand makes them. So I bought them off. It's only I think like 20 quid. They're quite cheap, and it's like it lets you plug either a Super Nintendo or a NES controller into an Amiga. So if you prefer the ergonomics of that over a Mega Drive, and you can program it as well. So one button could be auto fire, or you can have the 2-button mode, or so you can program it, which is really cool. And one button can be you can map a button so jump can be mapped to a button. That awful
that's good.
Press up to jump thing. Yeah, you can map that to a button, so you can basically pretend that you're not pretending it's doing it, but you can hit a button to jump now. So things like, I was going to say Castlevania on the Amiga. Castlevania is still terrible on the Amiga, but it's 8% better now. Guiana Sisters and things that are platforming games are a bit better with that. So yeah, I mean, one thing as well that I was going to ask you about. Obviously, it's kind of unique to have a YouTube channel that's hosted by a woman, yourself, that's dedicated to the Amiga. I mean, what's your experiences in kind of people sort of encountering an Amiga channel run by a woman? Has it been good stuff? I guess you get like trolls as well. What are your sort of thoughts on has there been other kind of women in like in this sort of Amiga community that have come forward and sort of I say come forward, that's a weird way of putting it, but have said, you know what, it's great that there's finally someone, or there's a woman there that likes this stuff as much as me. What sort of experiences have you had in that sort of respect?
It's actually quite a mixed experience because some are they're positive, both positive and negative. There are some who are very welcoming, like finally a woman. But then you get the others who are really, I mean, I wouldn't call them trolls because trolls is just like giving them an excuse to just do what they want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
there are people who can get quite a lot of people say they feel threatened, but they get what's the word? they get quite aggressive.
Why? I just don't get that at all. Because
it's a lot of people. A lot of them see it as it's their territory. It's a man thing. It's a doing this or something. Somebody said there's something wrong with you. Why are you like this? You're supposed to be into cooking and cleaning and blah blah blah.
Oh God!
All this. I have a human brain still. I can.
Yeah.
I can do these things just like you.
The Amiga is that good. Women might like it.
I mean, there were women. The women on the original Amiga team, so I don't know why everyone's shocked.
It's bizarre, isn't it? I don't really understand it. I mean, you've only got to see the ratio is obviously massively skewed to male because even in like I've run like me and kind of Stu together run a Sega Mega Drive collectors group, and I think it's literally 90% men. Which is kind of to be expected.
Yeah,
but it's also
I was going to say, I think I feel that because you're sort of a woman sort of on YouTube, I find you almost sort of go into quite a lot of detail, and you've Oh God, it sounds awful. You've shown you certainly know more about the Amiga and programming and all of that than I ever did. You know, the amount of stuff I've learned from watching your videos has been sort of phenomenal, really. And some of them are like, oh my God, you know, I just didn't even know about this. And I think when I had my Amiga sort of back in the day, it was more, how do you put it? I just used to like playing games on it, and I got a few upgrades. I remember getting a CD drive, and I had the monitor, and I had all the bits and pieces.
It's actually a better experience now, isn't it? Owning an Amiga now, I think, is actually more fun. You know what I mean? Because now we don't have to worry about swapping discs. We can just put a huge hard drive inside that has every game ever. You know, you could just set it up and just never have to put a disc in. You can connect to huge TVs now that we wouldn't have dreamed of, with really nice, you know, video. Add-on cards are still being made that are probably cheaper, like the 1233N that I have on Maddi. I think you've got that as well.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's £200. Obviously, it's not dirt cheap, but you know, it's still something of the same spec in the mid-90s will be double that, and that's probably double that again in today's money. And you can buy new cases for it. None of this stuff you could get then, and there's new games coming out that do things that the developers wouldn't have been able to do. So I think, yeah, Stu, and like Maddi as well, you probably agree that I think it's actually, I appreciate it and enjoy it more now than I did when I was a kid, because it's actually more fun, because a lot of the annoyances have kind of been diminished now.
Definitely.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think even, you know, the experience back then had its charms. I mean, I'm one of these people that people keep saying, why don't you get a go there? Why do you keep using floppy disks still?
Yeah.
I feel sort of, there's a charm in using that.
There is, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, the disk swapping is annoying. I won't say that it's not, but I'm more of a best of both worlds kind of person. So it's, yeah, as much as I do like the WHD load and the convenience of it all, I still do have like a disk box full of disks.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I mean, I've got like WHD load in my Amiga 1200 and a big CF card, but I haven't taken the floppy drive out because I know, you know, I might use it one day. You know, I have a lot of boxed Amiga games, the ones that I had originally. A lot of them still work. And you know, I might want to, you know, copy a save to another Amiga, and maybe I could do it quick on by just putting on a floppy disk. And yeah, I can't bring. I don't want to replace it with a Gotek. Really, I use a Gotek in my Atari ST, but that's really because there isn't really a good WHD load type solution for the Atari ST. Well, there's the Ultra Satan, which is this kind of compact flash reader you can plug into an Atari ST, but nearly all the games on the ST didn't have a hard drive installable version. And there isn't, the community just isn't as big. There isn't people that can, you know, reverse engineer the games to install like the huge Amiga community has done with. I mean, it's an amazing job that's WHD load. And it's kind of, I think it's kind of nearly done now, isn't it? I think pretty much every Amiga game from the sort of Amiga when it was a commercial, you know, viable computer, I think they're all done now. I think by about 2005. Although I found out Back to the Future Part 2 still doesn't work.
That's not really a loss, is it?
That's the only game. I was playing it the other day and it froze. And I was like, oh, maybe it's just my Amiga. But then I saw on a forum, oh, no, it just doesn't work at all for anyone. And no one's been able to fix it yet. And I was like, wow, that's like, Back to the Future Part 2 is immune to WHD load. But yeah, I actually think it's a better experience now. And like we were saying earlier, where you don't need to necessarily put it all in a tower. You can keep it in that awesome looking wedge shape. And it's funny we should mention cases, because I've been thinking about, you know, trying to do something about my Amiga 1200 case, because it is getting quite yellow. So what did you do to yours? Because I think you had the same issue. What did you do to yours to sort of make an improvement to your Amiga 1200 case?
Actually, I painted it. I spray painted it. I was thinking of. I really wanted to get a 1200.net case, which if you can get one, I do recommend, because it has got the really nice screw threads, and the plastic is actually way better than the original. But yeah, it's that
nearly impossible to get now. Yeah,
plus the keycaps are really expensive, and it's hard to get, as you say. So I mean, with Retro Bright, I'm not a fan of it because it just makes the plastic brittle. You know,
you can really screw up, can't you, as well?
you can really screw it up.
Yeah.
You can have marbling and things like this happen, but
Have you attempted it on
Huh?
anything? Have you attempted a retro buy?
I don't want to attempt it just because I just, I mean, I know that it would, not even if it's successful, it makes it brittle. So, and
Yeah.
also it yellows up quicker than the original did.
Yeah, it comes back,
It does.
doesn't
It
it?
comes
Yeah.
back with a vengeance.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so I mean, I decided to get a second Amiga case that's already yellowed, and then spray paint that. So I've still got my original case just in case I want it. But yeah.
Yeah, there's people sell them, don't they? I guess you can buy like a spares or repairs 1200.
You can actually people sell just the cases even.
Yeah.
I've got myself an Amiga 600 case as well as a 1200 case.
Oh god, the 600 case is probably the all-time champion of most brittle, annoying piece of crap ever. They look amazing, Amiga 600s. I always liked them. I know that everyone hated them originally.
I actually like them.
Cool. Yeah. I had a mate who had a 600 and I played it, and I had a 500 and I was like, oh, this is like basically my 500 but half the bloody size. This is awesome.
I had the 600. That was my first machine, and it was I love that machine. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and they're even better now because you can obviously plug like, you know, a Vampire into it and you've got an absolute beast of an Amiga.
Exactly. That's such a small form factor. I mean, I've got the equivalent of an Amiga 4000 in an Amiga 600 form factor.
Yeah. That's it. You want to travel back in time to the 90s and show it to someone and be like, look, this destroys your Amiga 4000. So it's funny actually with the Vampire, because me and Stu have kind of talked about a kind of a debate that's I think is ongoing, and you might have, you know, heard about this yourself or have an opinion on this. But there's a whole thing where Vampire isn't really an Amiga. It's just it's a whole extra computer that you've just shoehorned into an Amiga case. It's not an Amiga. What is your thoughts on that, if you have any at all?
Yeah, I personally actually think it is an Amiga because it's not emulation, it's simulation.
Yes.
So it's FPGA it's running at hardware level. So basically what emulation is you've got a set of hardware like a PC or something like this, and you're using software that's hovering above that, you know, manipulating the hardware to run as an Amiga, which is using power. Whereas with an FPGA board, what it is, it's a one-to-one replica of the original chips and the original hardware and the custom chips. So it's actually running at the hardware level as it would a real. So it's actually the real Amiga.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, I was in that kind of camp of, well, I might as well just put a Raspberry Pi in an Amiga case. But now I kind of see it as well. It's not that much different from putting a regular accelerator in, which basically just takes over everything and it's kind of a computer that you're putting in like into your computer. And also, like the most powerful accelerators that are still 68K,
yes,
were the 68060s. And have you seen how much they go for on eBay? It's disgusting. You're looking at over $1,000 for like something from the 90s, so there's no guarantee it will last more than a few weeks after you bought it.
I think Blizzard PPC 060, it's like I've seen it for over $2,000.
That's ridiculous, isn't it?
It is.
So a Vampire isn't cheap, but was it £300? And you got something that absolutely smokes that and probably won't fail.
Exactly. You know, so it's and I think there's probably this other thing like the Mister coming out, which is again an FPGA system. So I would, you know, if you put the Amiga core in there, I wouldn't hesitate calling that an Amiga. It's just that it doesn't have the Amiga form factor, which you could put it inside an Amiga if you want. But hardware, it's at hardware level, so you know, I again would not hesitate calling that Amiga.
Yeah, I think I've got an appreciation of FPGAs because there's the I use the SD to SNES flash cart on my Super Nintendo, and that has an FPGA that simulates the enhancement chips that the Super Nintendo used, like the most famous being the Super FX chip. Now, the challenge up until recently was that because a lot of Super Nintendo games used these enhancement chips, you couldn't get a flash cart that you could just drop all the ROMs on into an SD card, put that in the SNES flash cart, and you better play all the games like you can with the Mega Drive flash cart. But now this one that's got the FPGA, literally in the last 6 months, people have managed to get a Super FX core for the FPGA, and an SDD core and an SA1 core. So now, because of this FPGA and people programming it to run these chips, you can play every single Super Nintendo game from one cart for the first time ever. The ST says has been around for about 8 years, but the original developers didn't have the time to implement the other chips. He got a few of them going, and he kind of wasn't able to do the others. And these other guys have just jumped in and done it, which is amazing. And it's free. It just, you haven't got to pay for a new one. You just replace the firmware on your ST to SNES. And yeah, so that now runs everything, and it just goes to show how great it is. I mean, I've got like a Furia. I mean, Maddi, we were talking about the Furia just before we started recording, but now I'm kind of thinking about a Vampire, because just to be able to have that would replace my A1200 in something that's so much smaller, and it would run every single game. And that, I think the newer one that's coming out could do AGA.
At the same time, don't forget, with the Vampire, the older games will struggle. The OCS games will struggle because the higher you go in speed, and this was true with the old 060 processors.
Oh, that's interesting.
If the higher you go in speed, the less compatibility you'll get with older games, because some games are programmed with certain, without any memory mapping, but they require, like sometimes you get
like FPU issues and
and you get some games which always on OCS said, please, disable the memory board. So it's only 512K. Games like this struggle, and also games with that require the OCS graphics chip, they will struggle, and you get more incompatibilities, but
they just flat out don't run, do they? It's not even like they're a bit slow.
We run with serious glitches or run on high speed.
Yeah,
I think what the Amiga needs is a turbo button.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is kind of confusing in itself, because a turbo but should mean that it goes faster, but it slows
it slows the whole machine down. And I remember, I think we all had this friend at school. Oh, you have to press the turbo button, and my computer runs so much faster with the turbo button. Yeah, and oh wow! And you always thought, why isn't it always in turbo mode? And no one ever knew what the button meant. But
yeah, it was funny. It was to keep compatibility with like the sort of early 80s or mid 80s games, wasn't it, and stuff that would just go crazy if they had their frame rate wasn't tied. The physics were tied to the frame rate, which still happens now. I got something that I didn't realize would happen, but I've got like a 120 hertz screen connected to my gaming PC, and I tried to outrun 2006 Coast to Coast, and that's locked. That game locks itself to the refresh rate of the screen it's running on, and the physics are designed to run at 60 frames a second. So that's great, because most screens, were 60 or maybe 75 hertz. But because I'm using a monitor that's 120, it's like twice as fast. So I had to get some software, a Reaver Tuner, which you might be familiar with if you've ever used a gaming PC, where you can like force a game to stay locked down to 60 frames a second. So I have to run that when I want to just play bloody Outrun 2006 on my PC, which is annoying because that game runs great. Like you don't have to mess with it. It runs great in Windows 10. You can crank it up to 4K without downloading any patches, and it just works. But you have to be careful if you're running it on a high refresh rate screen, because it will just go it will just match the refresh rate, and you'll be playing it in double the speed. But yeah, that's actually interesting. I guess I don't know if they've done this with the version 4 is the one that's kind of coming out or is out. I'm not really sure what's happened with it, but I don't know if there's like a feature to sort of disable it. I guess would be what you would have to do, or.
I know on the Vampire, if you go into the early boot up menu and then you hit the disable CPU caches, it treats the 600 as it takes it down to a stock Amiga 1200.
Oh, cool.
I mean, even with that, you'd need something like Relocake or something to get it working on same compatibility as the 1200. Not even some old games will work on stock 1200 anyway. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't know if they'll know WHD load. I think they did try and patch some of those incompatibilities out, but I'm not sure how far it got.
With WHD load, actually, that's one way which it increases compatibility, because it creates the environment for each game. How it.
Yeah.
So I'm actually impressed with a lot of with how much compatible it is, because you have that game which you always wanted to play on, the old one, but it doesn't work on your 1200.
You have to dig out a disc to like bump it down to 1.3, didn't you? And then yeah, you kind of doesn't. You take the Kickstart. It has all the Kickstart ROMs, doesn't it? The WHD load sort of wrapper, and it just runs the game under whatever ROM that it needs to work properly. But you don't see it. You double click it, bang, and it runs. So yeah, so you have a vampire in your Amiga 600? Did you say, Maddi?
I have, yes.
Would you say it's definitely worth getting then?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's the hardware side of things. It's it's amazing. It's if you're wanting a big bucks Amiga or something, a highly accelerated Amiga, that is definitely one way to go.
Where do you think the biggest benefit is in using it then? Is it just the games, or is it like
even 3D rendering, even like something like writing music, creating music on Milky Tracker? It's so much really.
Have you tried running Quake and all the usual kind of tests that people like to mess with? Or...
Actually, I'm not that much into Quake or Doom or anything like this.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But in the other kind of software, I mean, even faster games, like you get the what was it called? The 3D racing games.
Oh, like Indy
Wipeouts and
yeah, like stuff like this. I've tried out, and you get the Mac emulator as well in it.
Oh yeah, like Shapeshifter, yeah.
Shapeshifter support.
Yeah, that would open up some like Photoshop and stuff, wouldn't it? Which obviously never had a.
Which is kind of some like old software or old games on the, like I was thinking of like running Prince, because Amiga didn't have a Prince of Persia 2.
Oh right, yeah.
So you can just like run that on the Mac emulator.
Yeah, I've messed around with mine actually. I've got Shapeshifter on my 1200, and I've managed to get the Mac had a version of Night Trap. which is really, really weird. Yeah, it got a version of Night Trap, but obviously the Amiga didn't. And you can run that. That was designed to run on an 030 Mac. So it actually runs better than my actual Mac, because I use a titanium PowerBook G4, which can run a lot of the really old, like 030 and 040 Mac software, but it runs it with a lot of glitches, and something like Night Trap doesn't. It has to run it in some kind of really crap, like low frame rate mode, because it can't, it doesn't really work. Because when Macs went to PowerPC, they had to add an emulator to the Mac OS code that would run whenever you ran something that was designed to run on the older 030 and 040. It was completely transparent to the user. They did a similar thing when Macs went to Intel, and you wanted to run like something that was designed to run on a G3 or a G4. There was some software called Rosetta that would run basically would emulate a G4, and you'd be able to run the older version of Photoshop that hasn't got an Intel version yet. But you wouldn't be able to tell; it just does it in the background. So yeah, and it actually runs better on my Amiga in a Mac in my Amiga, and so does like Doom, weirdly enough, because I guess because the Amiga didn't really get a dedicated port of Doom, it was just people took like the WAD files and sort of got them running. It wasn't like they didn't develop it from scratch, whereas the Mac, obviously, ID made a custom Mac version of Doom.
That's one thing which I remember when I went to Amiga Ireland last year. There was a port which Modern Vintage Gamer did of Outrun.
Oh yeah.
The port was really bad on.
Oh, it was awful, yeah.
But he did a port, and he ported Outrun to the Amiga for the Vampire, and it was actually pretty decent. And and also speaking of collabs, I haven't collaborated with many YouTubers. Again, it's the weird thing. I think they're probably just unsure of me. But my favorite collab was actually with Modern Vintage Gamer, and because he's been on YouTube for ages. I mean, I've been on for. This is my 4th year on YouTube. So I've been on here for
he's the Australian dude, isn't he? But I think he lives in the States.
He lives in America, yeah.
That's right. I think he definitely deserves, a mention, because he's one of my favorite YouTubers.
Yeah, he was great. Like I've been like really watching a lot of his Amiga videos over the last couple of years, because he's really good at testing. Like somehow he got.
I think that's one of the first Amiga YouTubers.
Yeah, you could be right there. I mean, it's basically him and Dan Wood, who we had on not long ago, actually, about a month ago on our show. they were great for that, for Amiga stuff, and a lot of the stuff that I know about the Amiga, modern Amiga now, I've learned from him. Like, I don't know how he got all of those accelerators though. He's got every one. Modern vintage gamer. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, he's actually quite into his Amiga, and my favorite collab was with him, and hopefully in future I have more collabs with him, because I don't collab with many people anymore. You know, it's a difficult year I've had, so I tend to kind of keep myself to myself.
Yeah, fair enough.
The one which I'm considering collabing with, and probably the only one at the moment if I would consider collabing.
Well, for some reason you wanted to appear on our show. I don't know what we did to deserve that, but we managed to appear, or managed to get you on our show, so we're quite privileged.
Yeah, normally I'm quite, I keep myself to myself a lot these days.
You obviously saw how professional
a year ago, but there's like as I said earlier on, a lot of people were supportive, but there's a lot of people, including big people, who weren't supportive, and there was a bit of ugliness here and there. So I tend to
YouTube drama
until I know drama. But
I think with YouTube, you've just got to go on there and just have fun and just make the videos that you want to do, and if that's on something extremely obscure, or if it's something really popular and you got a slightly different opinion, or your opinion's the same as everyone else's, just go with it and just make your video for yourself, and don't try and be the next PewDiePie and think, oh, I'm becoming a millionaire out of this, because
that's the problem with a lot of YouTubers. They're trying to do that.
Yeah.
Wait a sec, Stu. You said to us, if we start doing this YouTube thing, we're going to be the next PewDiePie and be millionaires. What's happened there?
Well, I don't know. We're trying to. I think what we got to do is lots of Fortnite streams all the time, and just talk about Fortnite.
Trouble is, they die, don't they? I mean, you could dedicate yourself to. I think Minecraft. I think that's probably kind of died on YouTube in terms of like becoming a millionaire out of it. And I think Call of Duty, that probably died in the late 2000s. And
things fizzle out.
Yeah, I think Fortnite's probably next on the list.
But at the personal level, I still play Minecraft with friends, but at the personal level, I think on YouTube more or less.
Yeah.
So do you do any modern gaming? Have you got a PS4 or a gaming PC or anything like that?
Actually, no. The only modern game I play is Minecraft. The rest of it's retro. My niece, I watched her. She's got a PS4.
Yeah.
She plays like Uncharted 4 and games like this. So I've watched her, but I'm not played myself. So I think after the PS1, gaming kind of fizzled out for me. I'm more into the retro than
yeah.
I mean, when the thing where you come home from work and like you don't have to sit in front of turn on your Xbox One, you have to watch 10 cutscenes just to get to your save that you had, and you've forgotten the controls because it's 13 buttons. Whereas an Amiga, you just turn it on, fire up Rainbow Island, bang, like you're straight in there.
I spent a lot of time on that game.
Hard as balls, but really, I mean, God, I spent on. I do play modern games. There was a lot of modern games. I mean, Stu, we're talking last week, or a few weeks ago, I played 8 hours of Ridge Racer 7 for some reason. But there was like recently, I know on the other weekend, I was just on my 1200. I just played Frontier Elite 2. And I played it for 8 hours. I know, actually for longer than that. It was a save that I already had, but I was already building it up. And I overwrote it accidentally with a new save and lost about a week of work.
Oh.
I had about 100,000 credits. So I was getting ready to buy a new ship, lost all of it, which like I was demoralized. Then I found out a cheat where I could just do 2 things and I can instantly get tons of money. So I did that. And I managed to basically kind of get back to where I was by cheating. So I've got that set up. But yeah,
cheats never prosper.
Trev. I've actually got Elite Dangerous, which is the new Elite. I do play that, but it's actually missing stuff that's in Frontier Elite 2 on the Amiga. You can't. Well, there's an expansion unless you do this, but you have to pay more for it. But you can't land on planets. There's no space stations that are on planets, which there is in Frontier Elite 2. It's just like I just prefer Frontier Elite 2, and it's just easier. And with an accelerator, it's actually playable because the frame rate was so. I mean, I used to play it on my Amiga 500 back in the day somehow, you would take off from the planet and it would literally refresh at like 1 frame a second. That's not me like going, oh, it runs at 1 frame a second, lol. It literally was actually 1 frame a second. And with the 1233 that I've got, it's now like probably about 10. But it's, you know, things actually move now, which is when you're in space, it was always okay then because there was nothing to really render. But yeah, it's like I said, it's kind of.
I imagine it on Vampire.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's also the fact that a lot of, I can now, you know, with retro games, the way you can access those games now, like we've talked about Flag. I mean, do you have like other retro systems that you play as well, Maddi, that you sort of dip into?
I've got quite a collection now. I've got the Commodore 64 is my second favorite computer.
Yeah.
I have the Spectrum. I recently got the Atari 800. So I'm kind of exploring different ones. Though of course, Amiga's primary, and then after that, the C64.
So you're going to get into what is Stu's all-time favorite computer, and it obviously destroys the Amiga, the Atari ST.
That's not true. Maddi, don't listen to him. The Atari ST is an awful computer.
Everyone hangs up.
One thing which I mentioned in my recent video, which I did on the Sidebox, was the one thing which attracts me to computers is a sound chip. You know,
yes.
Amiga with the Paula and the Commodore 64 with the SID, but also now the Atari 800 with Pocky. Pocky is actually fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm actually confused why the Atari ST used YM.
It's horrible. Yeah, it's absolutely.
It's just got like it's got a really awful sound. It's almost like the same sound chip that they got in the 2600, wasn't it?
It's in the Master System and the Game Gear.
That's a real insult to Atari.
Yeah. It's bizarre. You're playing these 16-bit games, but they sound like a Sega Master System.
Exactly.
It's a really weird combination.
The Pocky sound in the Atari 8-bit actually sounds like a 16-bit computer more than the Atari ST. So it's a bit confusing. Why? I mean, I guess cost, but I think it really let and also not only that, the Atari 8-bit has got hardware scrolling and stuff like that. The Atari ST does not.
Yeah, it's weird. And then you've got like the Atari Lynx is better than an ST. Well, it was designed by the Amiga guys, so it's actually weirdly got more. It's kind of the cousin to the Amiga, the Atari Lynx. In fact,
same thing with the Atari 800. Actually, the custom chips are designed by J Miner. So
yeah, and it's like the Atari ST had people that designed the Commodore 64 worked on the Atari ST. The Commodore 64 has way more in common with the Atari ST in terms of its, you know, who worked on it than the Amiga, which is really odd.
Even hardware-wise, the Commodore 64 is, you know, more similar to the Amiga in the sense of it has hardware scrolling and things like that.
Yeah.
A sound chip which does resemble an Amiga-ish kind of feel, you know, to me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it doesn't. It sounds good. It sounds, you know, it's weird. I mean, but there's other things like the Apple II. You know, one of the original 3 personal computers. You can get sound cards for that. There's one called the Mockingboard, and if you pop that into your Apple II, there are some games that support it. That sounds like sort of like Amiga, like sampled sound. It sounds awesome in a 1977 computer, and like the Apple II GS, which I think of as the closest thing to an Amiga that Apple made. That's got a really good sound chip. Still, I think it's as good as Paula. It might have more channels actually, but yeah, it's got a really it's quite famous. I think the sound chip. I can't remember the actual name. It's like eSonic made it. eSonic ends with a Q, not Sonic SONIC sort of thing. But yeah, that has a really good sound chip. And it's
actually look into the Apple computers, the earlier ones, because I don't know much about them with regards to that. Most of my knowledge is with the Amiga and you know, the C64 now and so forth. So it's quite interesting that you say that the Apple II GS. I'll look into that. It's similar to the Amiga.
Yeah, what I would probably say if I was for an Amiga or an Atari ST sort of fan, I would say, and you wanted to sort of, is there an Apple computer that's a bit like it that I can get into and sink my teeth into? I would say it's the Apple II GS. It's not compatible with the Mac at all, but it had its own library of games. It's compatible with the Apple II, so you can do anything on that will work, and that has tons of games. And yeah, the Apple IIgs had its own separate library of games. In fact, there was a lot of crossover with Amiga games. A lot of famous Amiga games had an Apple IIgs version, which is pretty good.
Prince of Persia first. I'm not sure if it was the Apple IIgs, but it was first done on the
Apple II. Yeah.
Apple II, right?
Yeah, the Apple II was the original version. Yeah, I think there's an enhanced Apple IIgs version, and you can put there's accelerators for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's got it has the same CPU as the Super Nintendo. It's got a Western Digital. It's called like a 65C16 or something. That's basically a 16-bit version of the 6502. Which is in the Apple II and is in a ton of computers. It's quite a legendary, in the NES. But yes, the 65C is a 16-bit version of that. And I think they used to program SNES games on it because it had the same chip, but it runs at like 2 megahertz. It's really slow. But I mean, most games run fine on it, but you can get accelerators. But apparently that was done because Steve Jobs was worried that the Apple IIgs would divert sales away from the Mac, because the 2GS came out a few months later and it had color graphics, it had proper sound, and if they put like a sort of a 4 or 5 megahertz chip in it, it would be better, and it was because it was cheaper as well.
That's actually quite crazy. They're competing.
Yeah, it's the same company, guys. Come on, same team. But yeah, they're worried it would just cannibalize the Mac sales. But it's like, I'd be like, yeah, it was just bizarre. But so it wasn't fully supported, and it kind of it did carry on though till about 93, 92, 93 before they actually actively flat out stopped making it. But yeah, the trouble is it's very expensive to get. I was lucky that I picked one up in the box like quite a few years ago before there was nostalgia for it. But yeah, now you're looking at a few £100s. And it's also the fact that Apple, like in the 90s, Apple was like nothing in the UK. It was a very niche brand. It wasn't really till the late 90s that Macs became common. If it's not, they weren't even common, but they started to be bought, in the UK.
I think you'd find them in like colleges, universities.
Yes.
Graphics departments.
Yeah, that's right.
When they're more.
Yeah, the first time I saw one was in my high school art class. There was an iMac in the corner, just one. I don't even know what it was used for. I never got to use it. That was the first time I saw one in the flesh, a Mac, and it took that long.
At university, when I went there was one which was used for negative scanning. And things
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
They just used this one thing, like in the corner. Yeah, I mean, I'm into them now. I love like old Macs. It's probably because I never got to mess around with them. It's probably why I like doing it now. But yeah, I'd probably like the.
I'm sorry, but it beats old Windows PCs.
Oh yeah, I think it does. I mean, I use Macs now as my main, just general use computer. I use a PC for gaming, but for just going on the internet, office stuff, email, all that stuff, I use a Mac for that because it's just better for that stuff.
I'm a bit of a rebel and use the Hackintosh. I've built a Hackintosh.
Oh, cool.
Oh, yes.
I've never actually. I've been tempted to try it, but
that was actually my first video. My first major project video on YouTube was I built a Hackintosh.
So what is it, just like an old Dell or something, and you just sort of?
No, it's actually I custom built. I got the parts that are Hackintosh compatible, and then I just built it, put it together, and installed the OS on it.
How does it run? Is there big, huge conflicts or issues with drivers, or does it just work just as well as if you bought a Mac? Would you say?
It's never going to work just as well as you bought a Mac. There's a lot of configuring to do.
But,
with Tony Mac X86, their support there and the software, the multi-beast, it does cater for a lot of the hardware. So and then you have to mess around with it a bit. Each time there's an update, there's a risk of it breaking. So you gotta do. You're breaking your system, the graphics will just become out of date.
Oh, you can get that with an actual Mac.
Then
don't break it. Yeah.
But it actually runs pretty well. In fact, the spec which I've got now, if I were to get the equivalent of a Mac, I would have to pay through my teeth for this. It's ridiculously expensive to get the spec of.
Yeah, the spec wise Macs are a dog shit.
It's true. I don't know why it's like this, but it just is. And definitely Hackintosh, you get more more worth your money for this.
Yeah, I mean, you're paying for the operating system and just the integration of the software and the OS and then the hardware. I mean, like a $2,500 MacBook Pro. I mean, I've got a gaming laptop, which is a hell of a lot cheaper than that. Absolutely destroys a MacBook Pro specs wise. I mean, it's got an NVIDIA GeForce, 1080. I mean, the Macs are still using like an NVIDIA. I think they're not even using those at the moment, but from about 2 or 3 generations ago. I mean, I can understand why, because they have to force like AMD or NVIDIA to make to write a driver for the graphics card, and they're not really going to be they're not going to put their best guys on it in a heartbeat when there's a fraction of the computers they're going to sell are going to have those cards in that are going to be Macs. So I can understand why, but yeah, for the price, you don't really get but you know that if you're buying a Mac, you're not getting it because it's the most powerful. I mean, there's also like computers that are like the Amiga. There's the Acorn Archimedes as well.
Yeah, that is actually, I'm curious about that because it's, I mean, again, the sound on that is really good, but the actual system itself is, it was supposed to be in competition with, but I think it was just, actually a lot of the Amiga games are ported to that.
Yeah, I mean, you can get like Cannon Fodder and Sensible Soccer and Fire and Ice.
Yeah. And
they basically, I don't think they're particularly enhanced. They're about the same as the AGA versions.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they take major advantage. I think it was quite easy to port Amiga games, even though they had a different processor. The ARM processor had like they used ARM Pro processors, obviously, that we now know as they're in phones, aren't they, and everything. But I think like the equivalent of the Amiga 1200 Archimedes, I can't remember what it's called. It's called like the A3100 or something. Apparently, like in terms of performance, like MIPS, it like absolutely destroys an Amiga 1200, and that's from the same era. But because it got into a niche of schools, and it couldn't really break out of that, it didn't get anywhere near the same software support. Even though they're really good computers, but yeah, they're a bit annoying because there's the earlier ones, the A3000s, that have the red function keys, but do look a bit like an Amiga 500.
About the one with the one you were talking about was with the green ones, right?
Yeah, the green,
green buttons,
yeah.
I think in processing power, it does probably beat the Amiga, but I think what the Amiga makes up for in custom chipset, which the Archimedes doesn't have. So there's a bit of a
I think the ARM kind of tries to brute force it, doesn't it, through the one chip.
Yeah, it's, as far as I remember, I think even the sound and the graphics are on one chip, the same they're done by the CPU itself, so it's
there's the benchmarks obviously don't tell the complete tale because it's just running like
I mean, like that the Commodore 64 is way slower than the simpler Spectrum.
Exactly.
3 megahertz versus 1 megahertz, so it's kind of but at the same time the Commodore 64 has custom, it's got hardware sprites, hardware graphics, so forth, so it kind of, in a lot of ways, it it beats the Spectrum, even though the Spectrum's actually much faster, like 3 times as fast, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like, the Amiga versus the Atari ST. I mean, the Atari ST had no custom chips in it. They didn't want to, they couldn't be bothered to develop any of that stuff, so they wanted to get it out quickly. Whereas the Amiga was started off as a games console, didn't it? So that's why they tried to pull this really awesome.
I think they marketed it as that finally with the Batman pack, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, they did. It did come out as the graphics and the graphics application and so forth, but and I think it was very expensive. So and Commodore US kind of goofed up a lot. Really?
Yeah, they were crap, weren't they?
To save the Amiga, I think the Batman pack. Actually,
yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was looking at the 8-bit guys videos, and he just like this really long Commodore history thing. He doesn't mention the Amiga yet. It's just it's like 4 parts, and it's like
he's done the 128, the plus 4, the 64, and then what was the ones before that?
The VIC-20 and
VIC-20, and that one that looked like a sort of off a spaceship.
Oh god, he bloody
probably specializes more with 8-bit.
Yeah,
because Amiga's more 16 and 32-bit.
Yeah.
I think it's also because there's that, and then the fact that it just wasn't popular in America, and he got a bloody. If you watch his last, YouTubers, Maddi, you might get this as well. Like people send you stuff for free. He got a bloody brand new Amiga 600 just sent to him for free. It had like the plastic like label off. You had to peel it off the badge, the case badge. And he just held it up to the camera and went, yeah, okay, cool, this is great, cheers, puts it back down.
Oh, God.
I was like, you just got a bloody brand new Amiga 600.
People are dying for this.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I was talking to Maddi, we were talking earlier about how my case, the Amiga 600, I've broken about nearly all the tabs off the bloody thing, trying to open it. I would love like a brand new one, yeah. It's just,
very sought after. I mean, any Amiga is actually which Amiga. I will ask you a question, even though
go for it.
which Amiga does not fully make sense to you if there was one.
I think the Amiga 600.
Really?
Probably at the
would say,
time, not now. At the time,
not now, but at the time there was the Amiga 500, and then they came out with the 1 megabyte and the higher Kickstart chip for the Plus, and then the next logical step was basically the Amiga 1200, and they actually brought out the 600. That was the machine I got, but the 600 was this is just an Amiga 500 here with a slightly different, had the IDE slot on there, the PCI CMA slot on the side. So it was slightly better, but it was more like a sort of a sideways move rather than a sort of a leap forward. And I'll probably also say the Amiga 1500 as well, because that was, I think we all know the story about that, but...
Yeah, I probably would say like the CD-TV.
Oh, the CT, yeah, of course,
I think that probably it looks cool as hell. I think it'll look awesome. But it needs to basically, they should just brought the CD drive out on its own.
Well, they did, didn't they?
Well, they did, but just have that and just that.
That's the thing which Commodore did twice.
Exactly. Yeah, they bloody love
CD32 and the CD3.
Yeah. If it's a CD thing, Commodore screw it up. That's like kind of,
I don't know what it was. This freaking CEOs. For me, it's more like rather than the 600, the 500 plus didn't make too much sense.
Yeah, maybe they should just brought the 600 out at that point.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
Yeah.
I mean, even at the 500 plus stage, okay, yeah, you get with this. If they had a 600, you'd have had the PCMCI port and the IDE port.
Yeah,
so
which would have been awesome.
Enough, and then the next logical step would be the 1200, and apparently there was just before the Commodore went bust, they were gonna bring out the 1300.
Oh wow! So that was like a little jump up from the.
It would have been actually quite a jump up. Apparently, it would have been.
Was this the one? I think I know what you mean. You can correct me on this, but I think they were developing the AAA chipset, and that was basically going to be at like PlayStation 1 level kind of graphics. I
think so, yes. And
which would have been friggin' amazing.
Yeah.
And that would have basically kept the Amiga up with, it would have surpassed PCs, probably for a short time. You would hope they would have kept upgrading it, but it would have been able to handle Doom and everything, really easily. And yeah, that would have given the Amiga another 5 years of mainstream. Yeah.
It was actually a done deal.
It's so annoying.
It is, because it was actually a done deal, and then all of a sudden SCOM came.
Yeah, I think they had the spec done, and they were saying they had all these DSP chips that basically would have given it would have been able to render polygons and textures, and it would have been as good as PS1. Yes. But probably about a year before, they probably would have done it about, well, it would have probably been about 94, 95 in a 1200 type unit. And yeah, I mean, God, imagine the software developers have just eaten that up. And the games you would have got, and like the software packages, like the 3D Studio Max, and would have been on the Amiga probably, and it would have been like amazing. It's
just a problem with the Amiga the CEOs at Commodore just saw Amiga as disposable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think I would also change. I think the 1200 should have come out a year earlier.
I think so too.
Yeah, I mean, they probably would argue that we wouldn't be able to get the parts. It would have been more expensive, but. I mean, the 68020, it was already like 5 years old by the time. Yeah.
Also, one thing which bothered me, excuse me, one thing which bothered me was, the fact that Paula was not upgraded.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Amiga
one more channel, and you could have had games with sound effects and music. Well, there was some games did that, but yeah.
Even if it was 6 channels, not even 8 channels.
Yeah.
At least some sort of upgrade.
Yeah, I mean, you could have kept the sampling rate the same. It still sounded good for the mid-90s.
Exactly.
It was better than Super Nintendo. It was better than Mega Drive. Yeah, 1 or 2 more channels, just add those on, and I don't think that would break compatibility, would it? It would just ignore the channels.
It could be backward compatible. It could have been any games with 4 channels will just use 4 channels.
Yeah, it would just ignore the
Exactly. So, and one thing I like about the Paula is that but as well as sample sound, it's also actually, a lot of people think that it's they cheat with regards to synthesized sounds. They just use sampled sounds anyway. But actually, it was capable of synthesized sounds. It had FM synthesis, so it had 2 things happening. I mean, it was basic, but still.
You could make things sound whatever style that you like doing.
Sounds as well as sampled sounds, which is, and do a hybrid of both, which is fantastic.
I remember, who is it? Is it Rob Hubbard? Is the Commodore, the SID chip legend dude?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the retro hour Dan did it, but I remember they were interviewing him and they said, "Oh yeah," so he obviously talked about how amazing the SID chip was, and then they asked him, "So the Amiga came out, and what was it like working on the music on the Amiga?" And he was like, "Oh, it was rubbish. It was boring. I didn't like it." That's like, wow. Because he had that argument, oh, it's just all samples and that's boring. I'm not into that. He just completely dismissed it.
I think we didn't give it much of a chance, but at the same time, I mean, it's basic FM synthesis. It's not as advanced as the SID. The thing is, I think he was probably so into the SID that once you get used to something, you disregard everything else.
It would have been just too jarring to start from scratch again and throw everything away.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's actually a completely different way of writing music.
Yeah. It's kind of not so much coding it, is it? It's more like finding the right sounds and instruments and stuff, and
exactly, yes.
Sort of like timeline based almost, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's that's one thing which would have been amazing for as an upgrade to Paula. My dream chip would be the Paula and a SID kind of in one chip.
Oh, so you could flick between,
with the three SID channels.
Yeah,
you could have kind of it would actually be a good hybrid chip.
Yeah, I mean, there's some games that try to sort of simulate the SID chip sound. Like I was playing RoboCop, the Amiga version of it, and the music's crap because I think they're trying to just make the Commodore a 64 version has got really good music. I think they were just trying to sort of copy that, and it's probably because it was this is an Amiga game from the mid '80s, so they probably didn't really understand how to fully use the chip. It's like Bitmap Brothers and all those sort of guys are the ones that actually took it and ran with it, and it sounds friggin' amazing, and Psygnosis and all those guys. Exactly. But yeah, people always rave about the bloody Super Nintendo sound chip, but that took like the Amiga was doing that stuff better 6 years earlier.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, even with the SID, right at the beginning of its life, the games had very, the sound, the music wasn't that great. It was
like Atari 2600 almost level, wasn't it? Yeah.
Exactly, and it was just very basic. So, I mean, back then when the system first comes out, people are still learning to code and make music on it. I think, as far as I remember, as far as I know, it was Rob Hubbard who actually was the revolutionary on SID, I think.
I think it was difficult to find people to make the music, wasn't it? Because you had to find someone that was into music, and so much so that they like to write it on normal real life instruments, but is also really computer geeky and likes computer stuff at the same time, and has eventually got to the point where they've somehow managed to combine those.
Yes.
They couldn't have been many of those people around in those days.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So that's probably Ben was probably the first person to work it out, I guess. I thought, I can do this. I can do my music on a computer. That's really cool. And I guess it became easier for people that when the programming bit was able to get sort of put behind, a mod, a tracker sort of application, and you had sound chips that could do sampled sound. That probably opened it out to everybody, I guess, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I wouldn't say everybody, but it's with trackers. Yeah, there is a certain level of programming involved, but at the same time, it's sort of more. Even though it's sampled sounds, you can kind of, like, for example, these crack throws.
Yeah.
You get a lot of. But they use the chip sound, like a small tiny loop, with as a sample. That's why it's so small.
Yeah.
They have a lot of programming to process that sound and make it, with filters and things like this. So, it's kind of, people say, okay, it's Amiga does it by cheating.
So there's more code actually getting it to work. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of people assume that Amiga does it by cheating, but no, actually, I don't think that's the case. It may not always be synthesizing the sound, but the filters are there and they're being used. So.
Yeah. Give the sound chip a break. God, everybody, lay off the port. Leave Paula alone.
Exactly.
I'm getting that on the T-shirt next to Amiga convention. But leave Paula alone.
I don't think anyone would know what you're talking about if you went on.
I do, and that's what counts.
Yeah, free Paula.
Right, so that was, oh my God, we've gone way over the hour that we were, trying to aim for, because we're just too damn enthusiastic about the Amiga. So, sorry, Maddi, we've kind of held you hostage here in Hangouts for a bit longer than we wanted to. But thank you so much for joining us. We've really appreciated having you on.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Right, guys. So, Stu, where can you find us on the interwebs?
Right, you can find our website, consoleshock.net. We're on YouTube under Console Shock. You can download the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. And again, just search Console Shock.
And we have our Facebook page as well, of course.
Facebook, yeah, and we're on Twitter as well. So if you could follow us on Twitter, because we haven't got many sort of followers on that one just yet. No, it's new. We've got loads of followers on the other ones, but
get your mum to sign up to it.
Yeah, well, I think that will take me a while to explain Twitter to my mum. So,
Maddi, where can we find you on the internets?
You can find me on, first of all, my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MsMadLemon, MsMadLemon. Of course, Facebook page, SoundCloud, Twitter. It's all linked on the channel.
So basically, MsMadLemon, pop that in there, and everything will be revealed on the internets. Awesome, right? Well, that was episode 49. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take care, everyone.